All right, good morning, everyone. Today we are going to talk a little bit about Google Sheets. I've got Crystal here as my moderator and helper on any questions that come in, so make sure you use that Q&A in here. This is going to be a very introductory kind of level of Google Sheets. A lot of the stuff that you'll be able to do in this session, you'll also be able to do in Excel. But there's a reason why I like Google Sheets, and we'll get into that in some of the more advanced sessions that I'll cover on this. The ability to collaborate, have multiple people in there at the same time, and pull data in from other sheets are all things that you can't really do in Excel that you can do in Google Sheets. So there's a lot of power there. We'll get into that, but we need to start with the basics because we can't walk until we can crawl, and we'll start back just a little step here. So really quick, my name is JB Mette. I am Executive Director of Technology for the district. I've been using Google Sheets for a long time. Really, I love it. There's a lot you can do with it, and I think the ability to work with data is something that just makes life easier when it comes to trying to work through things. So today's session, we're going to use some sample data. I put together a spreadsheet that has a lot of demo data in it. If you go to this address, and we'll put this in the chat as well, it will ask you to make a copy of the data, so you can use the exact same data that I'm going to be using today to work with, and then we'll work together. And if you have two screens, today is definitely the day to have that available so that you can see what I'm working on as well as what you're trying to do at the same time, so you can learn as we go. All right, so I'm going to wait just a couple seconds, make sure everybody has a chance to get that data down before we get started. Okay, with that in mind, let's go ahead and dive in. First thing I'm going to ask is, can everyone see my screen? Crystal, can you see my my spreadsheet data here?
Currently, I see you.
Just me, okay. So let's share something that's a little more exciting here.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. So you guys probably didn't see the link either, did you? That's in the chat. Okay, so the data that I've got here is what everybody should be able to get a copy of, and this is just some basic data that we generated. It's got an ID number, some dates, names, that kind of stuff. We'll dig into what some of these different pieces of data are. It really doesn't matter. This could be some exports from Canvas. It could be something from SysK12, anything like that. Let me real quick throw in here, because I know a couple of you are asking about the link again. Here's the link to that data, and we've also got that in the chat session as well.
It may ask you to log in when you click the link. It did ask me to log in, okay. And then it'll have you make a copy of it.
Okay, so let's try this one more time. Hopefully everybody's got a chance to get that data. All right, so we've got some random data here, but we need to talk about some of the basics inside of Sheets. And I'm sorry if this is going back a couple steps for some of you, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So just like in Excel, the basics of Google Sheets, we've got cells. That's any of the squares that are on my sheet. We've got rows. Those are the rows that are identified by the numbers on the left-hand side of my sheet. And then we've got columns across the top, A through F. Those are labeled with letters across the top of the sheet. So anything that we do, we can work with on that. There's also this cool little square in the upper left-hand corner that'll select the entire sheet. That'll let you select all the data, work with all the data all in one shot. Looks like we still have some people trying to get to the data. Can someone ask that in the Q&A? And I think if we put it in the Q&A, it'll stick for everyone instead of just in the chat session. Okay, so we got it in the chat again. And there it is in Q&A. Perfect. Okay, so moving on, we can select a cell, we can select a row or column, but what if we've got extra data here that we don't need? So we can delete any row, any column, any cell, really. If we just want to delete the data, we could select a cell or a set of cells and click the delete button on our keyboard, and it's going to clear that data out. In this case, though, I want to delete a row of data here that we just don't need. So Marcy has entered some stuff that we just really don't care about. So I'm going to delete the entire row, and I'm going to select that by selecting over here on the left-hand side the row. I'm going to right-click on 17, which is the row number, and I have the option to delete that row, and I'm going to do that. So now Marcy's gone. I don't have that data anymore. I can do the exact same thing with columns. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with these empty columns that I have over here. I really don't need those anymore. So I can just select a column and again, delete an entire column. And if I want to delete multiples, I can click the first one, drag across to the last one, and I get the drop down to delete columns, and I can delete multiple columns that way. So that clears this out. Now I have just the data that I want to work with. So with this data, we've got headers up here. That's what this first row is called, these column headers, so that we know what the data is. But we really can't read everything that it says and where that column header is. We need to make these columns wider so we can read it all. And we'll just take first name as an example. We know this says first name, but we can't read it all on our sheet. So we can click here in between the two columns. If we click and drag, we can make that as wide or as narrow as we want to. So I'm just going to make it a little bit wider so we can read all of first name. It's a very manual process to be able to make it the width that we want. We don't have to do that. We can go ahead and auto adjust it so that the entire column goes to whatever the width of the widest piece of data is. So let's look at last name here. We can see that there's a lot of long last names. But we want this to be as wide as whatever the widest amount of data is. So if we go to the same spot, we go to in between the two columns where our cursor turns into a double arrow. If we double click that, now that makes that column the width of every piece of data that's in there. So there's nothing wider than what this column is now. And I can do that one column at a time, but we can keep going this even further. I could select the entire sheet, and if I click in between any of these columns and do that same process, turn it into a double arrow and double click, it automatically adjusts all of the columns that I have in my entire sheet to match the width according to the column that we're working with. So now you can see the ID field is very narrow because it's just a couple numbers, so it's really nice and out of the way. But my email address field now is very wide because that's where my widest piece of data is in there. So it makes it a lot easier to read and see and work with all the information that we have. Let's talk a little bit about some formatting features. So we want to make this a little bit easier to read, and we have this first row here is our header row. We could change these titles. We could make a little bit more sense. We could type this out rather than just an underscore in here. So we could say make of car. We could say model of car, whatever we want to change this to. But what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the formatting feature. So if we look in the top toolbar across here, we have the same kind of features that you would have in Google Docs. You can make it bold. You could make it italic. You can change the color of the font. So we could make those dark blue. We can change the background of the cells. We can, let's say, make that really annoyingly green, and nobody's going to want to read this anymore. It's some fun colors, but you can adjust this to whatever you want it to be. That makes it easier for you to work with the data that's in here. We can also, oops, I'm going to undo that, because this is a sheet, just like in Excel, we can create table borders. So if we want to select this data here, and we want to set up some table borders, where you see up here in the toolbar, there's this square with a cross inside it. It looks kind of like a window. If you hover over it, it says borders. We have some options here. If we want to force all borders around all of the data that we have, we can select this first box. So that's going to make it so that there's a grid line in all of the data. Now, why do you need those borders? If you're going to just view it in here, you see the borders in here as a light gray. You see those grid lines. So you don't really need it if you're only looking at it online. But if you're going to print, by default, when you print, you only print if there's a border set. So when it's the light gray, it's not necessarily going to print those light gray borders. It's only going to do that if you actually set it. So we can select all borders. We could, if we want this data right here, for example, if we want to highlight this row, we could select just that row, and instead of doing all borders, we could select just the outer border. So then it's going to put a border around the entire outside of that row, but not on any of the lines inside of it. And if we want to take that a step further, we could do a couple things. We could take Hector's data here, and we could change the color of that border, and we could make that, let's say, a bright red. We can also change the thickness of that border. So right now it's on a kind of the thinnest of the options, but if we really want to highlight this data, we could select the thickest border, and that's going to stand out. And that's also going to print. Now, if you're printing a color sheet on a black and white printer, you're just going to see this in shades of gray. But if you do print this on a color printer, or if you print this to a PDF file, it's going to maintain all those colors, the borders, and all the shapes. Okay. The next thing we could talk about a little bit here is alignment. By default, you see kind of this data is all over the place. The first row here, our headers are all on the left-hand side. All the text is on the left-hand side. And if we look at the year of the car, all the numbers are on the right-hand side. And you can see the same thing over here in the percent complete column. All the numbers are on the right-hand side. That's kind of a default with Google Sheets. Text, if it's all text, tends to go to the left-hand side. Numbers tend to go to the right-hand side, and that's just the way that Google has it set up. It's similar in Excel. It's just a spreadsheet format thing. But I like consistency, and the very first thing I always do with my header column, besides changing the fonts a little bit, is I always center my header column, the column header, because it's easier to read that way. So up here in the toolbar, I'm going to select my header row first. And in the toolbar, I'm going to come up here to this one that has the multiple lines across it. And it starts out by saying horizontal align. So if we drop that down, you'll see that we can do a left, center, or a right. And we can choose from any one of those. In this case, I want to center it. With the rest of the sheet, it's really dependent on what you're looking for. We could do that by column. So we could say that I want all of the numbers in the ID column to be left-hand indented. Now you'll notice when I selected the column, it also captured that header row. If I don't want to do that, let me go back a step. I'm actually going to do this one with one that's a little bit easier to read. So let's take this email column. Let's say I want all of the email addresses to be centered, or on the right rather. And if I put all of my email addresses on the right, but I want my email title at the top to be centered still, I can select the column. And then I'm going to hold down my control key on the keyboard and click on email at the top. So now I've selected my entire column except for that one cell that I essentially unselected. Then I'm going to go back up here and change my alignment to the right. So now I've modified all of the data in that column except for my header to be right-hand aligned. So there's ways that you can work with data in a lot of different ways. Let's do hyperlinks. Let's talk about that a little bit because we've got this email field here. This would be probably a little bit easier to demonstrate if I had a list of websites and I didn't have some data to work with for that. But email is important too. I would like this sheet to be clickable. I want, when you come in here to see an email address, to really easily click on that. So I'm going to click on this first one. This is an email for Nori here. And up here in my toolbar, I have insert link. It looks like a little chain link. So when I click on that, I get the option for how I want to link this. And I could link it to the email, where I could just do a copy and a paste of her email right in here. And you'll notice now when I click on this cell, it gives me the option to send to that email address. I could also just as easily, if this was a website, have done the website URL. Works exactly the same way. And you'll notice email, again, is probably not the best field to use for this, because on any email address in a Google Sheet, it kind of tries to do this by default. When you hover over any of these email addresses, it gives you the option to add to contacts, send an email, or schedule an event with that person. You'll also notice if there's, and I don't have any FZ accounts in here, but if we were to have an FZ account, notice these two grayed out boxes that say send message and start video call. If this is an FZ account, it'll give you the option to use Hangouts to chat with that person here with send a message, and a Hangouts video call from within the spreadsheet by just clicking on the link. So there's a lot of interaction between Google Sheets and all the other components of Google in general. Okay, so that kind of covers hyperlinks. I know we've got some questions about some of the data, so let's talk about data formatting a little bit. We'll notice that in the date field, in the date column, it struggled a little bit here. It tried to get the width correct. Dates are really tough for Google Sheet to understand how to set a width for them. So when you start seeing cells with a lot of pound keys, the hashtags in here, that means there's data there, it just doesn't know how to display all of it. So, and that is actually my fault, because I copied this from an Excel sheet and it didn't know what to do. So let's ignore that and we'll come back to that. It did format it correctly, it just doesn't know what to do with those pound keys. But phone number is the one that I want to key in on. So you'll notice if I click on a cell here, it actually has a long number, but it's not showing the entire number. And while there's a lot of zeros, this is the proper length for a phone number. But it shows this weird 1.04e plus 09. It's trying to turn that into an algorithm. It thinks that it can shorten the width of the cell if it does that. So let's make this cell wider. Google Sheets is trying to fight me today. And then this is one of those cases where our formatting is wrong for the data that's in the sheet. So I'm going to select the entire column, and let me make sure that this is going to let me use this the right way today. So bear with me just a second. I want to make sure that this works out right. There we go. So what did I do? I want to make sure you guys understand this. So by default, you're not normally going to run into this problem, but it's struggling to format the data and show it correctly. And this has to do with data formats. Up here in the toolbar, we have a button that says 1, 2, 3 with a down arrow. And when we select more formats, we get a lot of options inside of here. We can do plain text, we can do numbers. Right now it's set to scientific, which is absolutely not what we want. And in fact, if I select this entire column, I'm going to unselect my header and change this to just a number. You'll see that it changes this to what would traditionally be a number, but it adds some decimal points to it. But for a phone number, none of that is accurate. So we're going to go in here and we want to create a custom format. We're going to go to custom number format. And in some cases, there's going to be what you're looking for. In some cases, there's not. In this one, there's not. We want it to be a phone number. So we've got a 10-digit number in this phone field. For every hashtag, think of that as a number. So this is kind of a wild card to work with. And really, the format we want it in is number, 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 dash, number, 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 kind of just the normal phone number field, right? So if we apply that, that's going to convert what was just a plain 10-digit number into a more traditional phone number type field. And again, this has a lot of zeros in it. but it's telling you exactly, this is formatting it into what you're wanting to be able to see. So that's how you can convert for phone number. Now we're going to resize this column now that we've modified that, and it'll change it back into the size that we're looking for. Great question. While we're talking about it, is a couple people have already noticed that there's some numbers showing up at the bottom of my screen down here. So there's two things that you'll get out of this, and you kind of have to be careful with how you use this. When you just select a set of numbers, it's going to try and add those up for you. So I'm going to select some data here, and you'll notice down here at the lower right, it shows the sum and it shows you the total of those numbers, which can be great if you're trying to just add a couple things up right quick. What I more frequently use this for is I want to know how many rows of data that I have that I'm interested in. Now, if I scroll down, I could tell you that I've got 999 rows in this sheet, but that's not how much data I have. It actually stops at row 500. But I might not be interested in all 500 of those rows. I may only be interested in the ones that I've created the borders around. So if I select just text for the cells that I'm curious about, you'll notice that I get count. So I've got 22 that I've counted here really quickly that are available for me to work with. Okay. Let's see. We've talked about resizing. One thing I didn't mention is you can actually resize rows the same way that you can resize columns. Right now, that's not too big of a deal because we don't have row data that's going over the length of the cell because we tried to auto format that. But let's do a little test here. I'm going to insert a column to the right. So I could put it anywhere in my sheet. Let's say I want to put it after last name, but before phone. So I'm going to right click on column D, and I want a column to the right. So I'm going to insert one to the right when I right click there. So now I've got an empty row, or I'm sorry, an empty column to work with, and I can put any data that I want to in here. So I'm going to create some fake data. And again, this data is going much longer than what the column is currently defined to go to. I can play with this a little bit though. There's another feature that I want to talk about called word wrapping. So I don't want this one column to have to take up this much width. This making my sheet really wide, and I don't want to end up with a sheet that I can't read all of my data on one screen anymore because of making it too wide. So I'm going to bring this back a little bit, and I really want it to not take up much more than this amount of space. So by using what's called word wrap, I can force it to go down to the next line. So I'm going to select this cell. I could actually select the entire column if I want to do it to the entire column at one time. But up here in my toolbar, you'll see the up and down line with a right-hand arrow that's got text wrapping associated to it. So if I drop down, I've got three options. One is just like it is right now, overflow. It's going to keep going. You're only going to see the amount of data that you're able to view in that one space of the cell. The last option is clip, where it's actually going to cut off the data and you're not going to see any of that data anymore past that point. But the one I really want to use is wrap. So if I click the center option that's got the arrow with a loop there, that's going to wrap my data and it automatically fills all of the data into the width that I provided, but it makes it taller. So I can, again, have some data where I can change the row to be too small, and then it clips it off to the bottom. But if I double click my arrows, it's going to readjust that so that it comes up to the height that we want in total. So resizing works in both the columns and in the rows. Word wrap allows us to take that text and bring it down to multiple lines within that one row so that we can view our data easier and work with it a little bit better. Okay, let's say we've got the car year here as a column. Let's say we want to replace anyone. Actually, let's do this. We'll do makeup car. Let's say anyone that had Pontiac as a makeup car. We want to replace Pontiac with really old because Pontiacs haven't been around for a while. So we just want to change that entirely. And this could be any kind of data that you want, but we want to change Pontiac in this spreadsheet to something else. So we can do what's called a find and replace. So we're going to do this in 2 steps. I want to show you find first because you can find any data in the sheet, but then I want to show you find and replace. There's a couple ways that you can get to find, but the easiest way for me, I always find, is to do a Control F. So when I click Control F inside of my Google Sheet, it doesn't open the find feature in Google Chrome. It actually opens this find feature in Google Sheets. So I'm not searching around for it. It's not trying to search a bunch of other stuff. It's only looking inside of my sheet. In this case, because I selected a column, it's actually only going to search in the column that I selected. If I wanted to find every instance throughout the entire sheet, I can do that by just clicking out of that column, click any cell, and I'll search the entire sheet for what I'm looking for. So for example, if I searched right now for 1986, it's going to show me, oh, here's 1986. That's in a car here column here. And you'll notice my up and down arrows. It says that I've got 1 of 10. So there's 10 instances of 1986 in my data. I can hit the down arrow and it's going to show me each occurrence of 1986 in my spreadsheet. Why I want to pick a column only is because there's times when that data could overlap a little bit. And an example of that would be in names. Let's say I wanted to search for James. Well, James could be both a first name and a last name, but I really only care about finding anyone with a last name of James. I don't care about the first names. So that's why I would want to narrow down my search and only search within a specific column, and it'll provide that data for me. So to get back to find and replace, let's say we've got Pontiacs, and I'm going to do a search for Pontiac. We've got 22 instances of that. I want to replace that. In our find filter, there's 3 dots over here that says more options, and that's going to bring up a new box. And I want to find anything that says Pontiac, and I want to replace it with really old car. Could be really cool car, whatever you think of Pontiac, you can change it to that. And I want to search in just the specific range that I've selected. I think in this case it's selected just that cell. So I'm going to select this entire sheet. There's a lot of other features here. You can match on case, you can match entire cell contents. Not too worried about that in this case. If you were to match case specifically, right now it would not replace any of my instances of Pontiac, because as you'll notice, Pontiac starts with a capital P in my data, but I want to replace it anytime it shows up, regardless of whether it starts with that capital P or not. And then down here at the bottom, I can replace, or I can replace all. I'm going to replace all instances of Pontiac. When I click that, you'll see replaced 22 instances of Pontiac with really old car. And I click done, and now I come over to my sheet data, and you'll see, oh, the very first one is really old car. And you can kind of see down here through my spreadsheet, I've replaced all the instances of Pontiac with really old car. So that's how you can use find and replace. All right. Let's answer a couple questions here. Looks like we've got some good ones. How do I quickly cut 5 rows and paste them into a different area of my document? Good question. You can do this with rows or with columns. So let's say I've got these 5 rows that I want to cut and I want to paste elsewhere. We can, for one thing, we could copy and paste. If we wanted to copy these, we could right click and copy. If we want to cut these, we can again select those 5 rows, right click and cut. And then if I want to insert them down here, for example, under row number 24, I could paste, and that'll paste my data. Now, in this case, it replaced what was in rows 25 through 30. So if I want to select this data, and again, right-click cut, I could insert, there's a couple ways I can do this. I can select 5 rows down here and insert 5 above, which is kind of jumping a little bit ahead on what I wanted to show you guys. But if we select 5 rows here, I can right-click, and you'll notice that it now says insert 5 above. And then I can paste that data in. Okay. When you do a cut and paste in Google Sheets, it's going to leave the original rows. So if you want to clear that back out, you've got to select those, right-click, and delete those rows to clear that back out. Okay, but you'll see that we've moved our data from up here where it had been down lower, and you can see that because the ID numbers are out of order now. So that's a way to kind of move some data around within your sheets. Let's see. We talked about the date a little bit. That's kind of messed up. Okay, so let's move on. Well, a quick question about text wrapping. Just really quickly, if you want to turn on text wrap, select the cell, column, row, whatever you want to work with. The text wrapping button is up here in the toolbar. You can select that. If you select overflow, it's going to show the data just as traditional. If you select wrap, it's going to wrap it around so that you can see that data throughout your column. All right, let's talk a little bit more about formatting here of our header row. Now, when I scroll down in my spreadsheet, I see all my data, and there's a lot of data in this sheet. So this feature is going to be super important. I lose access to my header because that was way up in the top in row number 1. Well, I'm kind of losing track here. I know this looks like a name, but I don't know which one is first name and which one is last name. This is probably the vehicle ID number, but I want to know for sure. So I'm going to go back up to the top of my spreadsheet, and I want to lock this first row so that no matter how much I scroll, I still see my headers. I still see my first row, so I know exactly what data I'm looking at. So I'm going to go up here into the View tab, and the very first option is called Freeze. And I can select no rows, 1 row, 2 row, or no columns, 1 columns, 2 columns. If I freeze the first row, it's going to ensure that my top header row always stays in place regardless of where I scroll at on my data. If I wanted, I can select the first 2 rows. I can select multiples, actually. I'm going to undo that feature. Let's say I selected, I believe it's a select like this. No, up to current row. Here we go. So if I had the top 6 rows I wanted to always keep in place, like let's say in the first 5 rows I had just a description of what this sheet is for, and then row 6 really has my header, then I can select freeze up to current row 6 because I've selected row 6 in my data. And now that top 6 rows is always going to stay in place. It's however you want to configure it for what makes sense in your sheet. I can do the same thing with columns. So I can go to View, Freeze, and I can select just the first column. And my data is not wide enough, so we can't really see this too much. Let's see if I can force it, though. So I selected the first column, so you'll see my first ID column now stays in place even while I move back and forth on my data. These 2 options can be combined as well, so I'm going to freeze both the top row that has my header and my left column because it has my ID number. So now I can move left or right, and my column stays in place, my ID column. I can scroll down, and my header row stays in place while it updates the ID number on the left. So it's kind of a combination of the 2. When you start working with a lot of data, that can be very useful over time. Okay, let's talk a little bit about sorting. So this data really at this point is in no order whatsoever because we moved some columns, we moved some information around. The ID numbers over here on the left are not in order anymore. But I don't really want my data to be an ID number order. Maybe I want it sorted by last name. So I can do that. I'm going to select the entire sheet because I want to work with everything all in one shot here. And I'm going to go up to, I'm going to go to data. And I want to sort, I can sort my sheet, I can sort my column, but what I really want to do is sort range. I'm very particular about this. I always want to sort by my custom range because I'm not always selecting all data, but there's a lot more features here if I sort range rather than just using their defaults that are built in here. And you'll see why. So I selected the entire sheet, and I'm going to click on sort range. Here's the big one. My data has a header row. And in this case, I've got a header row, and it pulls that in as my options to sort by. So I'm not dependent on, oh, I want to sort by column A or column F or column L. I can see the actual data that I'm working with based on what is in the very first row of my data. It considers the first row to be the header row of your selection. So that's why I always select all and do my sort range rather than using the built-in features. So once I've done this, I want to sort by last name because that for me is how I want to see this data. And I could do it A to Z or Z to A. So A to Z would be A comes first and then it moves down the list. Z is going to be the opposite. It's going to be a reverse sort. It's going to start at the end of the alphabet to the top. And then I can click sort. So now you'll see my last names are now in order A through F all the way down here, A through Z. But the names that, and this is a little hard to see because I don't have a lot of duplicates in here, but the first name is not necessarily sorted now. So if I had multiple Smiths in my data, and let's just, we'll do an example here. I'm going to insert a 501. And we're going to use the same last name, but I'm going to use Jane. When I run the sort, it's going to just leave it this way because it doesn't care whether Jane or Joyous comes first in my data. If I select all and I go to data, sort range, I'm going to follow the same steps, right? My data has a header row. I want to sort by last name. But now I really want my first names to be the secondary sort. So I can add another sort column and then select first name. So now I want it to sort by last name. It's going to sort by last name first, but when there's duplicates in the last name, it's going to sort alphabetically by the first name. So I'm going to click sort, and you'll see that it moved Jane to be in front of Joyous, and that's going to be true all the way down the list with any duplicates in the last name field. The first name will now be sorted by alphabetical order. And you can do this as many levels as you want. If you've got data where you've got a lot of duplicates in the first column and several duplicates in the second column, then you can sort this by a third column. However many that you want to sort by, you can do that. Just kind of think of it as stacking sorts. All right. Let's talk a little bit about filters because that's kind of the next step after you're able to sort data. You want to be able to filter data. So I'm going to select the entire sheet. And I'm going to go back to data, same section here, but I'm going to create a filter this time. Filters allow me to modify what I see of the data in front of me. So right now we've got 501 rows of data, but I only want to see anyone that has, let's pick on that really old car. I only want to know who has a really old car. So now that I've turned my filter on for my entire spreadsheet, I can go to model of car, and you see now that I've got these down arrows to work with at the header of each column. So under model of car, I'm going to click that down arrow, and I could use this to sort really quickly. So I could sort A to Z the model of cars that are in here and the make of cars that are in here, which is probably a little easier to work with. So you'll see Acuras come before Audis and that. But I can also change what I view here. So I want to clear everything that's in my spreadsheet, and I only want to view really old cars. So you'll notice there were checkboxes next to these. I cleared those checkboxes. I'm going to come down to really old car and click that, and I have a checkbox now. anything with a checkbox is what it's going to show me for data. So I'm going to click OK. And now I have a spreadsheet that has, well, we can tell you exactly how many rows. It has 22 rows of data. These are all the people with a really old car, and it tells you the make and model of that car, gives you all the name, everything else that still goes with this, still all in order. Now, if I want to take this to the next level, I can come over here to last name. Now that I have that filter on, it's really easy for me to sort. So I'm going to sort by last name of everyone that has a really old car. So this gives me the 22 people in alphabetical order by last name of everyone that has a really old car. So let's do that again. And in that process, I want to show you how to undo this filter. So up here at the top, we can see that it's filtered because it now has this little funnel icon on make of car. And I want to undo that. So instead of selecting just one at a time, I don't have to do that. I could to turn all the data back on, but I actually want to select all. That's going to bring back all of my data. I'm going to see everything, and it's sorted because I had sorted previously on the alphabetical order here. So let's put this back the way that we had it. One more time, I'm going to show this because I tend to go a little quick on these things, so I want to try one more time. So we've got make of car, and I want to, we're just going to pick a different one. I want to filter, I only want to know everyone that has a Toyota, let's say. So I'm going to clear out all of my selections down here, and I could search in this list. I don't have to. I could just start typing, because this is filtering or searching inside of my filters. So if I want to find everybody with a Toyota, I start to type TO, and you'll see, oh, there's Toyota. So I can select that, I can hit OK, and that filters it, so I only see now everyone that has a Toyota. And again, I can come over here to the left, and I can choose last name, and I want to sort by last name A to Z. So I'll click my little down arrow on last name, sort A to Z, and now it's all in alphabetical order. And you'll know when a sheet is filtered. Not just by the funnel over here, because you can see that's still active, but actually on the left-hand side, take a look at our row numbers. You can see it skips 1, 4, 9, 49. There's a lot of data that it's not showing here because our data is filtered. We're not taking a look at anything except that which we want to be able to see. At any point in time, we can turn off the filter. If we go back into the data options, turn off filter, brings our data right back, turns off all the filters. All of my down arrows are gone from the header section. I'm back to seeing everything that I have in my data. Okay, one last thing, and then I think we're kind of wrap it up because we've covered a lot of information here, and I don't want to overwhelm. I could certainly talk all day about Google Sheets, but I want to make sure that we leave time for questions and kind of go from there. So one thing I want to do is, let's say there's data that I don't want to see anymore. I don't want to delete it, which I certainly could. With car year, I could right click on that column header and I could say delete the column. But someday down the road, I might want that car year data and I still want to get access to it. I just don't want it in my way while I'm trying to view my data right now, work with it, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to select this column and right click, and there's an option here called hide column. So I'm going to select hide column. Now it goes straight from model of car to car VIN, where the year was at. It's not there anymore, but you'll notice up here at the top there's these two arrows, two black arrows that show up, and I go HIJL, so I know I'm missing column K right now. But I can work with my data. I can do everything that I would normally do. If I were to filter, if I were to sort, any of the things that I would do, that data stays there, and it stays with everything else that's in that row. So it doesn't get out of order. Nothing gets lost. It's still available for me for whenever I want to go back and see it. And when I do want to see it, I go up to these two black arrows, and I click on that, and it brings that column back for me. I can do the very same thing for rows. I can also multiple select. I could select rows, or I could select multiple columns. When I right click, I can say hide rows, and all of those rows are now hidden for me. And you'll notice the two black arrows over here. I can still bring that data back anytime that I want to. It's available to me anytime. Okay, so these are some of the basics of getting around, doing sorts and filters, working with the data, kind of getting it sorted and set up the way that you want to. Let's see what we've got on the questions.
I just see one more Q&A on my end. How do you get the count again at the bottom?
Oh, how do you get the count again at the bottom? Okay, so there's two things that you can do. If you're just wanting a total count, you need to select text and not numbers. So I'll take the last name field as an option here. If I select just a number of cells on the lower right, you'll see that count shows up. If you don't see that, you need to go up to view, and you should have an option for, I think it's formula. Well, no, formula bar is going to be up at the top. I think it's just built in now in Google Sheets. But if that's not the case, let me know and I can look up that answer. But you should see it count for you down here at the bottom. If you select numbers, I'll just point this out again. If you select numbers and you multiple select cells, it's going to try and do a sum rather than a count. So you're not going to get the count of the data that you've got. It's going to try and just add up all the whatever's in all of those cells. So that's why when I select this car year, I end up with a very large number because adding all these years together. If I do text, it's actually going to count the number of cells that I selected. And that's something I want to point out too, is it's going to count the number of cells, not the number of rows. So if I selected two rows worth of cells here, you'll notice that I get twice as many cells now because it's counting every single cell, not the number of rows in my data as I selected. Okay. Yes, we'll be sharing this recording. We've been recording this whole session, so we'll make that available to you guys later.
How do you bring back a hidden row or column?
Oh, okay. Yep, I can show you that. In fact, I'm going to hide 3 columns here. I'm going to select the columns. I'll right click and hide. And then you'll notice up here at the top, I've got 2 black arrows that show up. If I click on either of those black arrows, it's going to bring my columns back to me. And the same rule would apply to rows over on the left-hand side. There is a way to make all of a certain value in a cell to be formatted the same. It's called conditional formatting. It's something that I was planning to hit on in my next level of session. What I could tell you is very quickly, if you select all, in this case, there is under, let's see, under format, there's an option for conditional formatting. And you can set your rules on what you're looking for and what kind of formatting you want. You can change the font, the colors, that kind of stuff. So dig around with that a little bit, and I will plan on hitting that in the next level of session that we're going to do. Crystal, anything else that I need to key in on? I might have lost her because I think she had another session to go to. Is there a formula to count just the car makes? Like, let's say we wanted to know how many Toyotas are in this list. There's a couple ways to do it. Filtering is probably the easiest because there's a formula that you could use that would count if, and that's getting into the advanced level of what I was planning to cover. If we do a filter, we could filter for, oops, I'm in the wrong column here. I could filter for Toyotas, and then I could simply just select those cells, and it'll give me a count down at the bottom. The formula that you would want to use is count if, and then you have to select the column and then the text that you're looking for. So if you want to do a search on how to use COUNTIF, that would be the way to get you by for now, and then we can dig further into that in a future episode. And we are, yeah, I'm planning to have the next level. I would like to have 2 more levels actually during the next PD day in August. Unfortunately, today we kind of ran out of time and slots for having more sessions. I'll create a format from the 1, 2, 3 section. At the top, all I see is the one that we created for the phone numbers. Okay, at any time you can select and change to different formats. You'll see the ones that you created down here at the bottom, but you can also, you should see a lot of other options in here. You could select any of these. If you want to go back to it just being a number, you could certainly do that as a number, and you can see that it adds the commas inside of there. You can also go back into more formats, custom number format, and you can change to any format that you want to that's in here or create your own. For example, if I just wanted this to be a 10-digit number with no dashes in it, I could create that and apply, and now I just have a base 10-digit number to work with for the phone number. And those custom formats are going to be fresh and new inside of every Google Sheet that you open. So like these that I created here are not going to show up for you by default in a normal or a new sheet. And if you don't see the more format part, I might have to take a look at it with you. My guess would be it's just not fitting on the screen. One thing you might do is if you click on the 3 dots in your Google Chrome window, if you try to zoom out a little bit, sometimes that'll help get the menus to fit on your screen a little bit more so that you can actually see all of the options. A lot of times it goes off the bottom of the screen. Okay, I think that's about all we have time for today. I want to make sure you guys have a chance to go into your next session. I'm sorry if this was a little quick. I wanted to cover as much as I could, and I definitely want to have more of these sessions so we can cover more features, but I don't want to overload you all in one time. So thank you guys for attending. I really appreciate it. If you have any other questions or concerns or comments or anything, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help out at any time, and I will catch you again next time. All right. Stop.